come. Hey guys,
Hey,
Howdy.
Carl.
Hey, g'day.
we're all here, and I just want to introduce this idea, Friday Night Wrangle. This was an idea that I had because I consider you four of the smartest friends that I know, if not the four smartest friends that I have. And whenever I don't understand something, I come to one of you and I ask questions. And so I'm hoping that we can have a little discussion about the current sitch that's going on that you may have heard of over in Eastern Europe and Russia. And knowing that some of you are really interested, or everybody's really interested in geopolitics, I figured we could get together and have me ask some dumb questions and have you give some smart answers. So this is on the .NET Rocks YouTube channel, so it will be persisted, but it won't be edited. You know, we can bring people to it as we see fit. But I'm just going to say thank you for watching and thanks for joining us. And I'm going to start with my friend Richard Campbell from Vancouver, British Columbia. Hey. He has been my friend for a long, long time, and of course we do the .NET Rocks podcast together. Patrick Hynds and I go back a long, long, long time as developers, also in the Northeast here. He is a security expert, and we do a show together called Security This Week, but also very, very knowledgeable. He's an Iraq War veteran and a Gulf War veteran, I guess you would call him. And also has a unique perspective to bring. Richard Morris, I have to credit him with saving my life because he introduced me to the ketogenic lifestyle, and also is a very smart software developer and deep thinker about world matters from Canberra, Australia. Thank you for being here, Richard Morris.
No worries.
And Bob Reselmen, longtime friend from LA. Was a software developer and author, guitar builder, deep thinker, and is also a great humanitarian. I'm really glad that you're here. So who wants to start? How about I start with this question? World War III? Possible?
Yeah, possible. Not likely. But then we didn't think Putin invading Ukraine was all that likely either. The most part, folks, is like, nah, he's not going to do that. That's dumb.
The Ukrainians didn't think that he was going to do it.
No.
And they're used to his bullying, chest beating.
I tell you who did. I tell you who did know he was going to do it. U.S. intelligence.
Yeah.
And Biden was out front saying, "This is what's going to happen. This is the TikTok," and basically pierce the fog of war. So all of that time where there was a will he or won't he, and he can sneak in and get in placed. The U.S. intelligence denied the Russians that
Prevented him from controlling the narrative.
Yeah. By outing it. And they've been doing it all along. They know every time they talk to China, and this approach of simply telling the world, here's what intelligence is saying, this is what they're doing now. It's new and remarkably effective.
Well,
because it just undermines a lot of narrative control.
I think Eminem used it in 8 Mile, though.
That's true.
He did. So the thing about the thing is, the press queried Biden. They said, "How do you know this?" And he looked the questioner in the eye and he said, "We have really good information. We have excellent intelligence."
Well, and there's nothing more effective on an autocrat than your people are leaking to us. You have you have a spy in your midst. You have a traitor. You know, keep them nervous. That
two are under house arrest currently.
Yeah, well, and more. You know, clearly Putin. They're playing the autocrat playbook here. It's like next he will be accusing Russians of doing the wrong thing, of being disappointed in his people and so forth. And like the next day, Putin rolled that one out.
Yeah.
So isn't there a history here in Russia of deposing leaders who lose their mind and do stuff that's crazy, and especially losing wars? And so isn't Putin like looking around and saying, okay, who should I put under house arrest? Who don't I trust?
Where's it?
So since Stalin, there hasn't been this much of a strongman. He's so much stronger than everyone around him, and he's built interlocking security intelligence services that spy on each other. So it's tough for any two people to get together and not know that they're going to be outed. It's like the East German Stasi on steroids, and that's kind of makes him not proof against that. But it's very difficult to see that happening right now. I think it's much more likely we'll see a popular uprising after months of quagmire and deaths. He's really built safety valves against someone just walking up to him and taking him out.
But does Russia have months of fuel and food? I just don't know how much longer the tanks can run. They're running out of fuel trucks.
I don't know how their refining is. I know they have lots of raw oil, but I don't know what their refining capabilities are.
Well,
but
and all of the Western technologists that were maintaining Russian oil fields have left.
That's true. Yeah, of all the countries
I just
in
don't
the
think
world,
he's got months of runtime. I don't think he has enough gas. He certainly doesn't have enough food.
He thought he did because he had 4 years worth of exports worth of hard currency.
He thought it was
All
only going
in
to be
his
3
foreign
days.
bank.
He was in the echo chamber. He thought he was going to go in 3 days. They were going to fold. He thought the comedian was going to run.
Oh, no, he quoted Donald Rumsfeld. They will greet us as liberators.
Liberators.
Yeah, that always works out.
You got to admit that the U.S. shock and awe was a lot better than the Russian shock and awe.
But it also wasn't
we're
3
all
days
shocked.
worth. They had weeks of it.
Yeah, we're all shocked.
Oh,
Bob,
Jeff,
what's your take?
Actually, I'm not shocked. I'm profoundly disappointed. And
In the Russians?
No, everything. Just the whole blatant thing. There's a couple interesting aspects to this. I've been thinking about this because I rarely get invited to share my thoughts, and I'm reluctant to, honestly, for a variety of reasons. I'll write about them, but in verbal stuff. The first disappointment is no matter what, after we take away all the discourse, all that stuff, there are really people out there dying, and major cities in Europe are being rubbled to the ground. And
and some extraordinary ones that will never be the same again. It's already done.
Right, but when we go on TV and I've been watching Cobra on BBC, and when they do the shows with the Ferris wheel, and Big Ben, and all, people forget half of London. Most of London was leveled, all of Berlin was leveled.
Yeah.
Well, the way just destroying life and architecture as a way of life is nothing new to mankind, and I'm disappointed we just haven't gotten it. There's 2 new aspects here that are interesting me. And please don't think I'm uncaring, because people really are dying. People really are hurting. I'm looking at there's 3 things actually. The first one is Hannah Arendt, the political philosopher, and she has a saying that's really profound for me, and is that individuals do not come to power, groups come to power. No matter what, there's a group in power. Okay, so that's one thing to put to the side. The other thing that I find interesting is actually the notion of, when we consider the actual geopolitics and the military politics, not about running out of gas, but about military strategy and tactics, is let's call it maybe the possibility of tactical nuclear warfare. Okay. And what I find interesting about it all, there's only one country that has actually a history of executing tactical nuclear warfare, and it's called the United States. Yeah. And that's really interesting. The third thing I find interesting about all this is I call it the Darth Vaderization. I mean, we've been fed, we are in now modern media. It is really hard to figure out where reality, let's face it, the guy Zelensky was a TV star. Donald Trump was a TV star. In a minute, I think, the stand-up comedy down the street guy, for me, he might be the next mayor of LA. So the whole mediaization and the whole representation of media as being that thing we call reality, or a representation of that thing, reality becomes interesting. So the closing point is this, is the easiest thing in the world is to do good guys, bad guys. What's his name? Vladimir Putin is really Darth Vader, because if you took the helmet off, there he'd be. Yeah, he's under the helmet. He's an evil guy. They're the evil empire. They're building the Death Star. And it's up to us to get in the fighter jets and go out and do it. That is the discourse. That is the narrative. If we look around and talk about what's happening, there's not much more than that. And that's a disappointment.
But that's not what's happening, Bob.
What do you mean?
Darth Vader attacked, and the locals are defending themselves as best they can. We've all stood at the sidelines. So some folks are making noises about otherwise, and other than feeding some weapons to the defenders, that's all that's happened.
The
Which the
Ewoks
Russians have
come
always
out of
done to us.
the Ewoks have come out of the woods, Bob.
Right. And excuse me, I'm not. I didn't do a good job of explaining myself.
Yeah.
There's a separation between perception and actual military consequence.
Yeah.
Okay. And if we go to the media, that thing which people watch 6 hours a day, and its variety of flavors, nobody's sitting. I'm not hearing deep discussion. I'm not even hearing deep discussion about military tactics. I'm not even hearing objectives and all that good stuff. Maybe there is. Get it? There are people hurting, people dying. Some badass a nation state did something. Going back to, I've never ever expected the nation state to act morally. Go back to Richelieu back with Louis the whatever, pick a number. What's good for France is good, right? What's good for Russia is good. What's good for the United States is good.
You could say the same with the United States, yeah.
Yeah, but arguably, this has not been good for Russia.
No.
I'm still not clear on what Putin thinks he's going to get from this. Where's the benefit?
I think he thought after 4 other, engagements, he went into Georgia,
Chechnya.
and he did Chechnya, and he did Syria, and he did Crimea.
Chechnya was a disaster.
Chechnya
took years.
First time, not the second time.
But it didn't weaken him, and it didn't weaken his economy, and he used it to what he believed. Every time that he thought he learned lessons and would make his military better, but the kleptocrats have been stealing the budget apparently because the military is not in better shape.
But so the tactics are terrible. It's like they're conducting tank warfare from 1944.
Their Minister of Defense has never served in the military.
Well, and this is where I almost wonder if the military sandbagging him, that they told him this was a mistake and he refused to listen and said go anyway.
Who would tell Putin that this would be a mistake?
No one. That's the problem.
I think nobody has. And literally, they are executing an ancient tactic based on the idea that there's no such thing as an anti-tank missile.
The Russians have formed for this going back 300 years. I mean, the Potemkin village was a Russian concept. It was on the Dnieper.
Yeah.
It was
but they were careful not to let anybody go and walk around the Potemkin village. They wanted just Catherine the Great to drive by with their boat. So I'm actually a West Point graduate and a Gulf War veteran, as Carl said, and I have a lot of classmates who are still in uniform. They don't talk to me about sensitive stuff, but I got a lot of retired colonels that I'm talking to on a regular basis. We've always built up the Russian army, the Soviet army before that as, the 10-foot tall soldier, because anything we didn't know, we assumed the worst. Mm-hmm. And each time they've shown us who they are, which is they're a third-rate, very large army, and that relies on dumb munitions and has a few whiz-gig copycats of Western equipment. But if the German army or the British army or Canadian army or the U.S. army ended up fighting them, it's clear they would get their head handed to them. And so what they've done is they've gone into places where they could do anything and nobody would monitor them. Chechnya, there's not a lot of video of what they did in Chechnya. Syria, same thing. This is the first one where we actually get to see exactly what their losses are, where they're actually getting economic pain as well as the military pain. He doesn't care how many Russian soldiers die, but the economic pain plus the deaths of soldiers, I think, is going to turn the tide. If he doesn't get out soon, and I don't see a good off-ramp for him, I think he's out. I think I think a popular uprising will likely take him out before the end of the year.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, Patrick. So you've not provoked me, you've enticed me to asking some questions. So I want to go back to my biggest concern. My biggest concern is tactical nuclear. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
he doesn't even have things to hit with his tanks. What would you bomb?
Kiev is probably the one target that if he did it, he'd kill Zelensky. But the problem is this: if you believe that he's insane, it's a real possibility. Right. If you believe that he's just reached the end of the cycle of autocracy and no one will tell him the truth, and he's been in an echo chamber, and he's stolen $200 billion. He wants to spend that money.
Yeah.
He's not suicidal. Until they're about to take him away in chains, he's probably not going to order the end of the world. And launching a tactical nuke in Europe will cause European powers to engage, and that's the Third World War.
Right. So let's go back now, and this is something I'm curious about. And I'm really happy that I can talk to somebody educated about this, because it's goes back to this notion of civil war in the United States. I've never heard some serious discussion of what that would look like strategically or tactically. I just never have. I just don't get that.
About the nuclear, like going from
No. Well, just warfare in general. Okay, let's in terms of Russia, right?
Mhm.
Like, first of all, there are a lot of people there. No matter what, these guys might be nuts, but they're not stupid. Okay, so I'm sure they have military planners. I don't know a lot about military planning at this level. Wish I did. I don't. But I would be surprised if they didn't have military planners.
And they have a very, very well laid out battle strategies and doctrine. Their doctrine does allow for tactical nuclear use, but they've never done it.
Nobody's
Right.
ever
So
done
let's.
it.
Right.
We have.
Well, no, somebody has. The United States.
Well, let's be clear. There's actually no such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. Theoretically, a tactical nuclear weapon is a smaller weapon designed for a precise product, but all utilization of nuclear weapons is ultimately strategic and a failure. Like, when you deploy this weapon, now everybody's against you.
Yeah,
that's
it's like
it.
Right, but this is great. You're absolutely right, Richard. So let's take it to the next step. Let's do the video game. Okay. So somebody gets in a truck. They drive a truck into a major city, pick Kiev, whatever. Truck has a nuclear device. They take a cab back. They go at 100 miles away. Somebody blows it up. 100-mile rate. Boom, done. Now, that's part A. What does part B look like?
Part B is attribution.
Okay,
which is
exactly
who
what
did it.
look like.
Who did it?
So if let's take it out of that context just for a second. If that happened in Chicago, a dirty bomb, we would figure out who did it. And as an American, I'm going to say the truth here. I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. If 9/11 had been a nuclear strike or a dirty bomb, we would have done genocide. We would have wiped out entire countries because we would have lost our mind. If that happens in Ukraine, Europe's going to lose its mind because they're going to be downfield from the fallout.
Well, and presumably they wouldn't do the truck thing, other than because there's no way to play plausible deniability. The bottom line is where you refine uranium, where you enrich it, leaves such a distinct signature that we can always prove where the bomb came from. There's no point in hiding it. It's impossible. We know exactly all of the sources of enriched uranium. So it'll be an Iskander short-range missile, and it'll be a 200 to 400 kiloton yield weapon.
Okay.
There's just no upside. Right?
Well,
you're going to wreck a city, and then everybody's against you.
Hold up. Right. Let's
Russia
go back.
has the ability to dial down the damage on a nuke as well.
But still,
they can
any nuclear use is a nuclear use.
Yeah. The problem is, the bottom line is the moment that signature is fired and it triggers the satellites in orbit to identify nuclear detonation, the quote is from James Mattis. Mad Dog Mattis said, I do not think there's any such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. Any nuclear weapon used at any time is a strategic game changer.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's an automatic fail.
I'll let Bob finish his thought.
Let me sold. Okay, so let's go back to the scenario. Let's say it's overt, right? It's an overt use. Somebody from the enemy. The enemy goes into the city, detonates the
Or throws a missile.
Hear me out. Done. Okay. 10-mile radius, or a couple million people die. Done. I mean, and Herbert Kahn talked about this back in the 60s. So that's all done. Now what? Do we go for mutually assured destruction and now we just start radiating the planet?
I think so.
Or is it not? You think?
I do. Because at that point, We don't know whether another one's coming in 30 seconds or in 5 minutes or in 5 hours.
But we do. What we're doing is looking what everything's moving. The biggest thing that the war you fought in, Patrick, it was the Americans just demonstrated that they are capable of destroying any target anywhere on the planet without using a nuclear weapon.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. You can hit anything, right? Nuclear weapons were largely rendered obsolete in 1991, except as terror weapons. Because at that point, the whole nukes were not made to scare people, right? They were made to guarantee destruction of targets. But modern weaponry is precise enough and powerful enough to destroy any target. So I would argue if the Americans rolled conventional JDAMs across Russian military sites, they could destroy them all and never fire a single nuke. I don't think any other country could do that.
Can I add one thing here? And that is, I understand that Putin has some more different types of conventional weapons in his arsenal that can be very destructive, but are not nuclear weapons.
Well, they also require air superiority. They require air superiority, which he doesn't have.
Well,
for example, we have the mother of all bombs, the Moab, which is like a shipping container full of explosives. It's a
30,000 pounds.
It's a non-nuke nuke. In Iraq, we dropped 5 of them called daisy cutters and took out whole battalions with one shot.
But they also registered on the Richard scale. But you got to push them out the back of a C-130.
Right, which means you have to have air superiority, and they don't have it.
They can lob missiles from the ocean, though.
You can't drop one of these things from the ocean.
You can't.
No.
Because it'll land in the ocean. It has no trajectory.
Okay.
I got you.
Okay, so let's. I don't mean to co-op, but this is terribly interesting to me. Fascinating.
No, this is good.
So let's put on our hats and let's pretend I'm trying to figure out how this all works beyond the sound bites. All right. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, so there is a war going on. Is it any worse than 91 in Sarajevo? No, not that much. Is it any worse than every day in Syria, or Lebanon? Not that much. Okay. So what I'm wondering about then is the end game is, how does this play out? What does it look like a year from now? Okay. What is our situation? Is it just some sort of noise?
I think Richard's right. And I don't think Russia has a year. I think that Russia has months because of the sanctions and because of the bodies coming back. So I talked to a friend of mine in Germany today, and he said that the reports they're getting is that Belarusian graveyards are now secured off-limits zones because they're bringing back so many bodies, and the hospitals are completely full of wounded Russian soldiers. That's
They're
not
cremating on site. They've brought in cremation facilities so they don't have to transport bodies, and they don't how many soldiers are just going to disappear?
They're leaving the thing is that they're leaving the bodies. This is something an American military would never do. They're leaving their own bodies.
They're leaving some, and that's what we're counting. But they're taking a lot, and we're not getting counts of those.
Yeah, and they're
I think they're over 10,000.
10,000 so far.
So the U.S. Pentagon says about 2,000 to 5,000, 2,000 to 4,000. But the Pentagon is very conservative. Yeah, if they can't see.
And by the way, that's still a disaster, right? Like that's an astronomical number of soldiers to be killed in such a short period of time.
They lost 15,000 in 9 years in Afghanistan. For perspective, in 9 years of a devastating war in Afghanistan that helped bring down the Soviet Union, they only lost 15,000 troops. If the Ukrainians are right, they're nearing 15,000 troops this weekend, dead. And that's 3 times that will be wounded.
But we know that Putin doesn't care about the deaths. But I think the fuel truck is actually the linchpin.
He'll care about bodies coming home.
That's why he's burning them on site. Right. I mean,
so what the Ukrainians are doing, what the Ukrainians have offered to do today, is to pick up all of the bodies and ship them home to Russia.
Yeah,
which is genius.
I think it's brilliant. Well, the whole if you surrender to us, we'll let you call your mother and we'll get you to the border so you can go home. Yeah. All of these soldiers that they've lied to, this is brilliant.
So when the soldiers go back home, and he's not going to kill 150,000 of his troops, and a lot of them are conscripts that have to rotate back. And even if he extends them, when they go home, the stories are going to go home with them.
Yeah.
And you can't block that.
I just
And
don't think it's going to last this long, Patrick. I think the
I
fuel is
don't
going to do
either.
them
I think
first. The
so.
stories I've been
So-
really enjoying coming out through Jane's is they keep finding crashed fuel trucks driven off of bridges, like seriously destroyed, but no bodies.
Yeah,
I think
sabotage.
these soldiers are taking these fuel trucks out and they're wrecking them because they figured out that this is the weak spot of this army, and the sooner we run out of fuel trucks, the sooner we go home.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
And that is the weak. They're totally under provisioned. Listen, the brilliance of the American military going back to World War II has nothing to do with weapon systems. It has to do with logistics. The ability to feed, fuel, and arm a huge number of people continuously for an extended
Anywhere.
period of time. And literally nobody else can do this anywhere near the same scale. And the Russians are actually better at it than they're doing here. Like, they're so
There was
bad at it in Ukraine. I almost think it's intentional sabotage internally. Like, how do you show up with 150,000?
All right, Campbell, let
and
somebody
so
else
few
talk for a
trucks?
change.
There was a
I'm
US
so
general
staggered by
who
that.
said, there was a quote from a US general, something along the, and Patrick could probably correct me on this, something along the lines of amateurs do tactics, professionals do logistics.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the
I've
hard
heard
part.
that.
That's the nature of the,
But so,
Right.
and so somebody asked me, it's like, how is this going to end? Like, when will the tanks pull out? It's like, the tanks will be abandoned because they don't have fuel.
They already
They'll
have.
walk home. Well, they have
Yeah.
already started, but I think it's good. I think it's all of them. I think none of them are coming back.
So for Bob's benefit, if Russia didn't have nukes, one, we would have probably already gone in and kicked their ass, and two,
Definitely.
we wouldn't have any concerns because the Ukrainians would just equip them and they'd kick them out of the country. It's the threat of nukes and chemicals and all that other stuff that's
Not just
got
the
everybody
threat of
worried.
nukes, but the threat of a NATO versus Russia
Which is
conflict,
nukes.
which is
There is
essentially
no-
World War III.
There is no world scenario that I can see. And I was a Cold Warrior. I was ready to fight the Russians. I studied Russian at West Point to be prepared to know when they said shoot him. And that was the first words I learned in Russian. So there's no scenario I can think of where we start killing Russians in an open battlefield that doesn't end up in a full-on nuclear exchange. Now, here's the problem for Putin. No one knows, including me. I haven't held a security clearance in a number of years, and no one's told me this. But no one knows what our $700 billion pays for in terms of missile defense. If there was a massive nuclear exchange, there's no way to tell whether North America and our allies in Australia and other places would be completely protected via Iron Dome-like secret projects. And Putin doesn't know either.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that's eroded a lot of our nuclear treaties is the fact that we've started developing such high-tech programs. And remember, Russia spends $66 billion on military. We spend $700. We outspend them 10 to 1 every year for the entire length of my lifetime. So the nuclear war is not a guaranteed I win button for them. It might be a guaranteed lose. Europe loses too because they get irradiated with it. But there's a lot of unknowns here. I don't think Putin's crazy. He's criminal, but I don't think he's crazy. I think he's suffering from the echo chamber and overconfidence, and he stepped in it and thought he was going to hit the easy button and win, and now he's stuck because he can't show weakness.
Yeah, and he has no out. But arguably he's already done. He's just a dead man walking, and
I think so.
The Siloviki doesn't move that quickly. It will take time to remove him, but he's already done.
Sechin.
So now he's in that
It's
weird.
Sechin and his rank, not Medvedev, because they're the Siviliki. There's two. What Richard's referring to is the internal politics of the Kremlin that Putin balances, the Siviliki versus the Siloviki. And the Siloviki are the ones with the daggers and the intelligence services. They're more likely.
And they're the most. And Putin is ultimately a member of that group, and it's most likely that group that will remove him. And by the way, has been the group that has removed from Khrushchev upward. Like whenever this has happened, it's ultimately been the Siloviki.
Well, I'm curious what you think, Richard, and actually Richards and Bob and Carl as well, about the rich eye. is
Rich eye.
I think that if Putin holds on to the point of exhaustion and he really has prevented a coup, I think a popular uprising will eventually come, just like we had in so many other countries. And if that's the case, I think there's a chance. I don't think it's a certainty. I don't think it's even a likelihood, but there's a chance we get a liberal democracy in Russia that makes NATO a moot point, that could join the EU.
I mean, and we tried
I
that
think
once.
that's wish casting a little bit. I think that may be
Yeah.
wish casting, unfortunately,
Well,
because
now we roll out the fundamental aspect of geopolitics, right? Which is that geography does affect politics, and that geographically, Russia tends towards authoritarianism because of its geography, because you need central control to make that country operate.
Well, wasn't that true of Hungary and Poland and most of the other countries? But
Yeah.
when you get democracies on your flanks, they don't invade each other.
Well, they tend not to, but Poland and Hungary have far more navigable rivers and working spaces than the Russians do. You know, the problem with Russia is you must build roads and rail to operate the country. You don't have any natural transport. That's their fundamental limitation.
Richard Morris, can you finish what you were going to say there? And then I want to move on to a new topic.
No, let's move on.
All right. I'm going
to summarize.
Okay, I'm going to bring up a website here. I'm not going to bring it up, but I'm going to give you a link.
Favorite brownie recipes?
osi.pwop.com. So this is an opinion piece. We are in the first open source intelligence war, and this is speaking to what Bob was talking about earlier. How, the media gives us our view of what's really going on. But this war is a little bit different, and this guy's thesis is that we're witnessing the world's first war where open source intelligence is providing more actionable insights than classified sources. For example, TikTok provided direct evidence of the nature of troop and equipment movements. Commercial imagery showed field deployment locations, field hospitals, then proof of movement to invade. Dating apps provided indications of which military units are being deployed. So there's this whole, and the list goes on and on, Twitter and all of these things.
I deeply disagree with this.
Okay.
All of these social media suffer the same problem, which you have no idea what's real and what isn't. I still agree that this has been an open intelligence conversation, but mostly because U.S. intelligence through Biden has largely been simply telling you what they know, which they never used to do. But the issue is always credible sources. And the one thing you cannot put side by side is credible in social media.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
I don't disagree that all these social media sources have produced stuff, but you can shape that. It's not true. It can also be cut off.
That does lead to an interesting discussion about how impressive Ukraine's digital game has been.
Oh, dude.
They are
what a great time to have a social media savvy president.
Just incredible. I mean, it's just remarkable that as soon as Putin and Facebook both had a major breakup, Putin stopped Facebook being available to Russian citizens, and Facebook started getting their bot whack-a-mole out.
They canceled
all of a
each
sudden
other.
You start seeing, you can see the sock puppets showing up to try and reestablish their networks all the time, all over the place on social media. I mean,
Twitter especially. Like, Twitter got to be really nice when this broke out and all the Russian bots disappeared.
Yes.
Like, it's remarkable how much that changed.
It did.
Well,
I think there's an interesting corollary along that, which is all of those 20-something Russian hackers who are not Cold Warriors, who predate all of this, are utterly horrified by what Putin has done in Ukraine. It's fun to play in the digital space. Nobody dies, which happens to not be true, but you can tell yourself that lie when you're a 20-something hacker in St. Petersburg.
Has
but
anybody
when you're
here
seeing what's happened in Ukraine, you can't. I think an awful lot of those Russian hackers, they've been stunned into silence because they can't believe what their president is doing.
Does anybody else here has anybody got footage from real friends that are in Ukraine and take video and pictures with their phones and send them to you? Because I have.
No.
So I
Yeah.
have seen firsthand what's going on there. And
And I'm not going to deny that what's going on there is not true.
no. It's
Right.
it's
So
yeah.
I,
It's
I'll
kind of
just
hard to fake
counter-
the videos that I just saw.
to counterpoint a little bit what Richard said. I agree that is a very important concern, but there is a trove of data out there that we can now crowdsource, go through, and point out things and find things that analysts aren't going to see. And so
Mhm.
it is a public war in a way that no other war has ever been. There's more PR footage from the Ukrainians. There's more, like Richard Morris mentioned, the Russians are leaving behind their soldiers' bodies. We wouldn't know that without social media pictures. We're seeing the javelins and we're seeing the reasons why air superiority hasn't been established by the Russians, because we're seeing the Stingers being used. We're seeing the results of the artillery and the dumb bombings. We're seeing it in a way that even the best broadcasters couldn't present it to us. And some of it's going to be manipulated, bogus, and shaped, but there's so much volume. Even Russia can't shape enough of it. And they're
No.
cut off from a lot of
And
these sources.
how did the Ukrainians end up being the smart targeting guys, right? Like you're seeing them use those using those Turkish drones to feed coordinates into artillery systems, and they're targeting Russian logistics centers, right? You're seeing big fuel dumps go up and fire.
Generals,
So
4 dead generals.
Yeah. And
Or
keep
dead generals,
killing
using the
generals.
cell phones.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that it's just Ukrainian data. I swear there are Russians feeding stuff to their Ukrainian brothers going, my general
so.
is here now.
I hope so.
No. And look, I'm all over kill a general, save 10,000 conscripted troops, right? Like more of that. But that's an interesting angle on this whole thing, and the fact that their communication system broke down, and so they're forced to use cell. I just don't know how agile the Ukrainian systems actually are. Then again, how much of it's actually Ukrainian, how much of it may be American. Like, I'm speculating here because I know nothing, but I think there's an awful lot of American intelligence infrastructure over Ukraine right now.
Bob?
So there's still the outstanding question to me. Here's what I'm hearing. There's a spectrum, and the spectrum goes either we're going to all die in nuclear warfare, okay, or Putin's going to run out of gas. That's the spectrum. Okay.
Well,
and
they're not mutually exclusive.
No.
Okay.
I think Putin running out of gas is inevitable, and nuclear war is not.
Work with me here. They go to sleep. They get tired, right? It's the boxer in the ring. He just can't kill him. He just falls down. Work with me. So there it is. There's the spectrum, and there's a resolution. What's interesting me that is about when I say what's it like a year from now? Because let's face it, and granted we're a predisposition here, but a month ago, the big story was 1 million people died of COVID, right? And 2 years before that, there was another big story, and 3 years before that, so this is the big story, and this is sucking the oxygen. Meanwhile, what I'm wondering about is, okay, nobody's stupid here. There is going to be some sort of ending. If it's nihilistic, we're all there's not a lot to think about, right? But if it's not, what happens afterwards? And what's interesting to me about this is that if we start looking at fundamental social political shifts, something happens different in Russia. Now, remember the promise, when the Soviet Union ran out of gas in 1990 was the peace dividend, right? Oh, it's going to be free, peace and love. Pot's going to be legal. Well, pot is legal, but, we're all going to have better, caviar, whatever. That didn't happen. As a matter of fact, what happened, it was, to my understanding, was pretty much a raping of the Russian economy. All right.
Right.
Yeah, the peace dividend happened in America. We call it .com boom, right? Like all
hear me
of
out,
that.
Hear me out. I'm getting to the point. I'm still getting there. Wait, I'm close, man. And then we can go back. I'm getting close. But the question is, what it's interesting to me is imagine is after all the dust is settled, right? Given potential outcomes, what does the world economic situation look like? Because there's a whole other part of the world, and how powerful, how much more powerful will those things that represent reality to us become? Now, I have my own thoughts, but I'm interested in the others. Or you can say, that boring. Let's go talk about blowing shit up.
No, I think this is good.
I don't know
I
if
think
anybody has the answers, and that's kind of why we're here, is just to sort
well,
of talk through the.
let's assume Putin's still in power. Let's
Okay.
assume it's a scenario where we're all alive, no nukes have been fired, and Putin's still in power, but wounded. Russia will be wounded for a decade. They'll suffer
state.
economically for a long time. Even if sanctions are lifted tomorrow, a lot of those companies are not going to go back. A lot of those jobs aren't coming
No.
back.
No, I think Russia is the new Iran at this point.
Yeah.
The bottom line is Europe has now had to take a step back. And when I say Europe, I actually mean Germany, and said, we can't buy gas from Russia. And if you acknowledge that it is a strategic liability to your country to buy anything from this pariah state, which is exactly what has happened to Iran. Iran has had oil too, right? But only pariahs buy from a pariah state. I think Russia is now a pariah state. That and even if they somehow got out today, that's the new state of being.
I think there's a timeline for that. There's an end date for our reliance on oil, and part of it has to do with the economics of how of generating energy or generating energy from chemical renewable or nuclear sources. It is now currently cheaper to generate electricity from solar or wind with 1 to 4 days worth of battery storage. Every single US state could be running the whole year through. Even every state, no matter what their resources of wind and solar are, could be self-sufficient, at least for electrical energy. Extend that to transport. Extend that to the fleet electrifying.
And Germany's all in for that, but they ended up phasing out nuclear, and they're going to have to bring nuclear back.
I think this is why Putin chose this time. So why did Putin choose this time? Changeover of the German chancellor. The downward Gompertz curve, or the sigmoidal curve down of reliance on oil. This was his last moment to strike, and I think that going forward, we're going to find that we're going to have more reasons not to use oil. We're going to have more reasons to do things like, for example, Germany can restart 4 of their nuclear, their mothballed nuclear facilities overnight, and
probably should.
The problem in Germany is, their heating energy is all oil, is all fuel oil.
So Richard, I think you're right. Saudi Arabia, for example, a couple of years ago brought a minister in whose job was to maximize oil revenue because they realized they were going to leave trillions in the ground worthless when the world moved past oil. So if Saudi Arabia's already gotten that message, I'm sure Russia's gotten that message, that they won't be able to profit from all the oil resources they have. And so with Putin, with Saudi Arabia, it's about money. With Putin, it's about power. And it's about empire building. He believes he is the chosen one to rebuild the Soviet empire and assert Russia as a superpower. And he overextended. That's now, to Bob's point, I think that you're right, that we're gonna see a world in the future, not the immediate future, but in the future, where oil is something we use for plastics, and it's the cheapest thing around, but there's nothing we
burn anymore.
Right. And I'm looking forward to that, but I think it's 2035 to 2050 before we're in that world. I think if Putin survives this, he's mortally wounded, he's super weakened, Russia is crippled, NATO is reinvigorated, Germany is spending money on weapons again, 2% of their income if that passes. But there's other realignments that are going to happen. That Bob,
to me, the bigger thing with Germany is giving up on Nord Stream entirely. Stop buying gas from Russians.
But also,
There's
no reason is going to stop buying their weapons.
Yeah, they could have finished that pipeline from Qatar, right?
Yeah,
they just didn't want to. They didn't want to spend money in Turkey. And I'm not a big fan of Erdogan, but given a choice between the two, build the pipeline across Turkey, dude.
Big lesser of two evils. But one of the things to remember is that, and I lost my train of thought. I was going somewhere. I forgot. Sorry.
To do with oil.
Hmm.
Right. Well, what I'm hearing, I mean, an interesting point here is, which is sort of interestingly strange, is
Oh, India.
India's one, a remilitarized Germany, which is sort of an interesting thing to ponder. Okay, we haven't talked about India, we haven't talked about China. I mean,
Hmm.
I'll
if
get
I'm
to that.
China, man, I'm just laughing. I mean, it's party city, man. You guys go ahead, not blow yourselves up. Feel free.
Yeah, that's
All right.
Well, I think I think that China's actually suffering from this because this is a cautionary tale for them invading Taiwan. This is
yeah.
Totally.
a
Yeah.
oh crap, the world might actually unite. And unlike Russia, who has enough food, it's not great food, but they have enough wheat to feed themselves. China doesn't. China
Yeah.
imports half of its food and 80% of its oil. China couldn't
Well, and
support these sanctions for a month.
and China has
I need
no
to
experience projecting force in any way.
I
They
need to
don't, but
jump
they
in
think
here,
they do.
Pat. I need to jump
Go
in
ahead.
here. I want to share another article on point.pwop.com. China's place in the Russia-Ukraine war. This is a transcript of the WBUR NPR On Point show that I was listening to today. And Oriana Skylar Mastro said this, and she is a fellow at Stanford University's Freeman blah 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 Institute, all sorts of credentials. She says Russia is far weaker than China is. China spends $280 billion dollars on their military. Russia spends about $69 billion dollars. China has increased its military. Let me just finish this and then you can comment. China has increased its military spending by 640% over the past 15 years, while Russia increased it only about 65%. And then don't even get me started with the economic heft that China has. The type of sanctions we have levied against Russia, we would not levy against China because of the amount of pain China could bring to bear on us. And furthermore, the Chinese economy could have handled this level of sanction. So I think the bottom line is the Chinese always thought to get Taiwan, for example, they'd have to move quickly before the United States could respond militarily in force. The situation in Ukraine only consolidates their previous views that they'll have to move quickly, that the type of sanctions levied against them will be acceptable, excuse me, that they can manage them, and that potentially the military support coming from the U.S. allies and partners to Taiwan will be limited.
So I believe that's an opinion. I don't agree with it.
Okay.
I believe that China is far more frail and brittle than people give it credit. And I believe our reliance on China is far more luxurious and quixotic than it is vital.
I would
I don't-
argue
I-
Taiwan is more important to the United States than
Exactly.
China is, for one reason only, and it is the four
Semiconductors.
TSMC.
Mhm.
Yeah, the four TSMC plants. They're irreplaceable for the planet. And there's a bunch of people trying to replace them right now because they need to be replaced. I think the
But it
biggest
takes a
thing
while.
that this conflict has highlighted is don't depend on your questionable friends for key assets,
Yeah.
right?
Talk about a
And
euphemism.
China's been playing this game for a long time, right? And so the bottom line is those fabs in Taiwan are insanely important to this planet, and there is no scenario other than capitulation that protects those fabs. And
So,
so we need to stop depending on them.
from that same article, some recent votes in international bodies that have happened since February 24th, which is the date of the invasion. At the UN International Court of Justice, there was a vote to order Russia to halt its invasion of Ukraine. The vote was 13-2. China voted against the order along with Russia. The International Atomic Energy Agency took a vote on a resolution that deplores Russia's invasion of Ukraine and urged Russia to let Ukraine control nuclear facilities there. 26-2, 5 abstentions. China voted against with Russia. At the Human Rights Council, a vote on a request to hold an urgent debate and condemn Russia's military operation in Ukraine, 29-5 with 13 abstentions. China abstained while noting its opposition to the request. And at the UN General Assembly, a vote to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, 141-5, 35 countries abstained, including China. So they're
So I think we
clearly
can
got
stipulate that China is not against. China is not pro-Ukraine in this story. but I don't
They're trying
believe
to
that
skate
necessarily
the
makes
middle.
them pro-Russian. I think
Yeah.
what China is trying to do is feed Russia just enough to get them to beat themselves to a bloody pulp, because
Yeah.
that's one can near peer off the map, and so
Well, and
I mean,
keep the
China's
attention of the West off of China.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
You guys go play over there and kill each other, and when there's bodies lying on the ground and you guys are all done fighting, then maybe we'll come in and negotiate a peace treaty or something.
I think Patrick's right that China is coming from a position of weakness here, and I think that they see this as an opportunity to keep Russia in the war long enough to weaken itself, almost terminally for the regime. I think that's what's happening, but
It's
Well,
both
the question-
fascinating and evil at the same time.
So I guess the question is, and I know Carl's opinion, or at least based on this article,
Yeah, it's not my
Who
opinion.
thinks-
I'm just reading the
Okay.
transcript.
I think, and I'll go on the record as thinking that this makes it less likely that China engages in adventurism in Taiwan, because they're seeing this as a cautionary tale. Their military is even less tested and less battle ready than Russia's. Russia's fought in other
I would
wars,
agree with that.
and their equipment is modeled on the same designs.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
I'll tell you from the Gulf War, Russian tanks have one thing they do better than any other tank I've seen, and that's burn. They burn very brightly. I've read many a magazine to them. They just don't have what it takes.
Our friend
and
Brock
we're
Allen.
we're not talking about rolling tanks across Taiwan.
I get
we're
it,
talking about
but-
amphibious invasion.
Yeah.
I get it.
There is only exactly one country on this planet that's pulled off successful amphibious invasions at great cost.
Yeah.
There are no successful winning an amphibious invasion is like winning an earthquake, right?
Yeah.
Like they're always hard. China's done none, and you're going to start with Taiwan. They have the Aegis missile system, for Christ's sakes.
All right.
so which is the only one? D-Day. Is it D-Day?
Yeah, D-Day,
The
yeah.
only
Well, in
amphibious-
China-
All of
Yeah.
the of Pacific too. The Americans perfected amphibious invasion, which is to say they knew the number of Americans that were going to die every time they did it,
Yeah.
and they
That's
could
pretty-
make that
pretty
work.
sad. All right, listen.
But
Our
that's the
friend
reality
Brock
of it.
Allen, and I've been neglecting the YouTube channel here, but Brock says, do you folks really think Putin was trying to rebuild the USSR, or was he just lashing out about neighbor Ukraine's desire to join NATO? Has Putin made our prior statement or actions that was his? Has Putin made prior statements or actions that was his goal?
Putin has stated that the greatest tragedy in humanity was the fall of the Soviet Union.
I agree. Yeah, he said that. He actually
So-
said that recently.
So
he
that
wanted to
is
bring it back together.
one of his things. He believes that Russia has a rightful place as the superpower, one of the primary superpowers, and he wants the same respect the Soviet Union got. One of the other things is that Russia got the Soviet Union's permanent seat on the Security Council,
Security.
and Zelensky's challenging whether that was legal, because they are not the Soviet Union. And so, this adds a lot of insult to injury. But yeah, I think it's he can have more than one reason. And Brock's a smart guy. He can have more than one reason for invading. He didn't. This is very close. This is, like Carl said, the Cuban Missile Crisis for us. This is right in his backyard. He doesn't like it. He thought he could quickly decapitate them and be greeted as liberators. He thought that he could, notch another win on his belt and humiliate the West and have us all, blaming each other and wringing our hands. And he just didn't expect to get smacked in the face so hard. He expected his military to perform better. And so he's losing on every single front. And
Now,
his only ace is to try to just tough it out and try to survive. Sorry.
Yeah, so Cuban Missile Crisis, great analogy here, but different, of course. I can understand Putin's not wanting to have nuclear weapons so close to him pointed at his country, just as we didn't want nuclear missiles in silos in Cuba.
Yeah,
no, I'm just saying I understand it. Like, I understand that, but we didn't invade. We didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
And also Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Romania are all part of NATO. None of them
That's
have
right.
nukes.
Yeah.
We're not moving nukes
Well, and the
closer to their border.
Ukrainians had nukes at the end of the Cold
And
War
agreed to give them
and
up.
gave them up for a treaty that made them an independent nation.
And we said we
right,
would
like-
protect them.
Yeah, well, we didn't say that.
not a
What-
guarantee.
what- yeah, the guarantee was
Russians
that,
also
Moscow,
agreed to
that
their
Russia
border.
wouldn't attack them.
Yeah, I think
Russia
we just
also agreed to
applauded
their
them.
border.
Well,
Let
that
me go
clearly
back to my
stirred
fir-
up a
my-
whole lot of stuff. Hey, I'm going to start with Bob. Bob, your response to that.
Well, my response is I'm going to go back to my first statement when you asked me what's this for me. I'm going back to I'm extremely disappointed. Okay, I mean I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember getting under the desk and kiss your ass goodbye. I
Yeah.
remember that. I remember all that stuff. I remember the body bags. I remember it all. And what's just so astounding and what's saddening to me, it really is sad, is that given our technology, given that we can, we have Star Trek technology today, we do all this stuff. Remember from Star Trek, we finally figured out that it wasn't about just to have a lot of stuff. It's to,
Right.
do better because now we can have everything we want, right? And this is, so what I'm walking away from, is this the human condition? Is this it? Is this as good as it gets?
You know,
if
that was
that's
a
it, I'm
TV show,
disappointed.
right? There was.
What?
Yeah,
I mean, it's a
Roddenberry had
noble
some
idea.
great optimism.
Roddenberry's idea is very optimistic, but in order to have everything that you want, you have to have replicators that can just make them out of thin air.
And
of
even then, they
course-
had wars.
And things that we need to be produced by
Well-
people and with money and all of that stuff, and that's not going away anytime soon.
Can I
Yeah,
chime in?
but
Just-
my point,
But I understand your
Yeah.
point. All
So,
right,
Bob-
Patrick.
my
Oh, go ahead, Bob.
I'm
Continue,
sorry,
Patrick,
Bob.
please.
Finish up.
No, what I'm saying, so the disappointing, sad part for me is I go to bed at night now with grandkids and I say, this is as good as it gets.
So
This is
I'm going to
it.
give you a hopeful statistic that
Yeah.
even with all the wars that have been going on, even with all the killing in our doorsteps and all the other things, human traffic, all the horrible things, the last decades have been the safest times in humanity in terms of the likelihood that any individual will be killed by another human. So we keep
Right. And I,
driving those numbers
Cool.
down, and that's going to eventually go. I don't know if it'll ever go to zero, though.
no, so now you're bringing up a good point. So this is where I'm paying attention to is this thing called let's call it the epistemology of reality. How reality presents ourselves is presented to us is pretty goddamn weird.
Yeah, and
You know,
often not accurate.
Yeah. So what? No, this is Pinker, right? This is even the person living in the homeless shelter down on the
Steven
corner
Pinker.
from me, right?
Great book.
Yeah, he's still living better than probably half the royalty in Europe in the 14th century.
sure.
That's
I
right.
get that.
Yeah.
I get it.
Hmm.
But so going back to here is either what would have happened. I mean, it is interesting. During Vietnam, there was an interesting statistic during Vietnam is that in Java there was also a civil war on the scale of what was going on in Vietnam and in Indonesia. But the American press never reported on that war. It was all Vietnam. And again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm on my HOA. I try to do all the right things. But what's going on in Ukraine is like business as usual in Syria, right? It's business
Yeah.
as
Right.
usual in Gaza.
Right.
And so that
Oh,
that's
sure.
it. Yeah.
So
So now so what I think is going to happen, here's my suspicion. In a year from now, there's going to be all this stuff's going to level out. China's going to come in, rebuild Ukraine because they can build stuff fast, right? And the banks are going to somehow figure something out, and we're going to go back into the metasphere, and it's going to be another TV show. And that's not, is that terribly bad? I don't know.
I think-
Not for me.
I think that if Zelensky's still alive, I don't think he'd let a Chinese contractor anywhere near his country because they sided with the Russians. I think
Yeah,
there
but I
would
also
be
say
another
this,
term.
but I also think the West will turn their back on Ukraine after this is over too.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We'll
The
pick another
Europeans
time.
are really broke up about it. It's different for them.
I
It's-
hope it's different, but it hasn't missed my notice that we're all tied up in knots about Ukraine because they're awfully white.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right.
The Syrian,
Awfully
the Syrians are Middle Eastern, right? They're brown.
Because Europe is being
Yeah.
threatened.
Yeah.
Well,
They,
remember the class
the
of
problem is
cultures.
that those look like Europeans running out of
But-
those burning
but
buildings.
It's also the class of cultures, because there are different cultures in the world, and while it's kind of the same thing, it's a little different. The Middle East is a different culture. I can see the Germans and the Polish are taking people into their houses like never before.
And these are their brothers.
But they're culturally, they're all Christians.
They're
They're all,
similar.
and
Yeah.
and I get it. It feels like there's a racist tone to it, but we're tribal. In the end, we're tribal. And you're right,
People
Bob.
identify with the Westerners identify with Ukrainians far more easily. Than
But
they
it's the
identify with
geography,
Syrians.
Richard Campbell. Just like you said before, it's the geography. Those are the neighbors of Europe.
Yeah. Syria's
Russia
just
is a
not
real
that
threat
far away,
to
friend.
Europe. Syria is not.
Yeah.
Well, culturally,
Yeah, culturally they're different, but they share lines of latitude. Like you can't the geography is not it.
Well,
The
Syria
time zones
doesn't,
are the same.
Syria doesn't want to be the next superpower and isn't willing to, they're willing to kill their own people. But
Well, neither is Ukraine.
Yeah, neither.
No, I'm talking about
Ukrainians
Russia.
just wanted to be autonomous.
We've managed to go a whole hour without even mentioning Nazis. That's impressive.
oh my God, Nazis!
That's
Well,
that's
how
a
dare
whole
we?
bucket of worms to get into.
Those Ukrainian
Is
Nazis.
it actually a topic? It's just a red herring.
It
Here-
is. Yeah.
No, it's an actual.
If you want me-
well, it's both. It's both a red herring. It's both a myth and a reality. There's like 900 people in the Azov regiment who are literal neo-pagan Nazis.
Great,
The full
But it's
Himmler Black
900
Sun
people
whole
out of
thing.
44 million.
and I mean great
Yeah.
in terms of
Two-
wow, that's not a
200,000
lot.
army.
Yeah,
Out of the 200, so it's about 1% of the army.
I mean,
But
Nazi,
because they're an actual regiment.
Nazi,
You can
Nazi
find
literally
Nazis
means
everywhere.
National Socialists.
Yes,
And
yeah.
so, if you
Well, these
wave a
guys are
flag
full
and you
on
believe in
Hitler.
social security, technically, you have some of the same feelings as if you like Adolf Hitler, it's a whole different thing. And that's what I believe as a Nazi, is those that follow, read Mein Kampf and love what Hitler was trying to do.
So what you're saying, Morris, is that yes, there's a few Nazis that were making noise, and Putin used them as an example and blew it all out of proportion and said, yes, the whole country needs to defend itself against the Nazi scourge, and we're going to go fix it.
What I'm saying is, when Canada decides to come down and invade you, and you call up all men from 18 to 60 to fight, and you hand them weapons, you're going to be handing weapons to a lot of Proud Boys.
We'll hand them beer.
They'll bring
We'll
their
all
own.
sit down and have the beer.
It's
and
not
some-
exceptional. It's not an exceptional thing. It's just
They're going to bring their own, Richard. They have their own
yeah,
weapons.
unfortunately, they're packing. I know.
They're not
We'll
very
just-
good.
Trade them some
Got a lot of
beaver
gadgets
pelts
now.
for some Molson and sit down and tell some stories, man.
Yeah,
That's what we'll do.
here's an angle that I've really been working hard on. The brilliant weapons, the javelins, the modern version of the Stinger, because where Stinger's been around
Switchblade.
since the
Switchblades,
80s,
yeah.
the Switchblade.
Those are cool.
That has meant that the infantryman is lethal to tanks, is lethal to aircraft, and is basically unsuppressible. You talk about control of the skies, but you can't control manpads. You can't control two guys in a foxhole that can shoot down a vehicle just like that, or that can fire and forget on a tank and almost guarantee to kill that tank. Like all of a sudden, all of the attackers have a terrible problem, a very, very difficult problem.
I think even ships are vulnerable to some of this stuff.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and 3 to 1's not a big enough number. Like the cost for the attacker is so high. And now that we figured out to stop worrying about trade sanctions and focus on economic sanctions, that when you cut off the money, you cut off the bad guy. Like now that divide, if I'm China, that's what I'm afraid of. That the West has not only unified, they learned a new tool. Yeah, sure. The Chinese have a lot of American money, but it's in American banks.
Can I give you guys two statistics that are really striking? One is that in warfare, in open fields, you need 3 to 1 odds to be even in the offense versus the defense. So if I've got 100 men defending in a field with with breastworks, I need 300 to attack for it to be a fair fight. an even fight, for both sides
and
to
a
have
fair
an
fight's
equal.
for suckers. You don't
Right.
do fair fights.
But get this, in a military operation in urban terrain, Mout, it's 5-1. You need 5 times more attackers than defenders. There
I would
aren't
argue
enough
these
Russians
numbers are
in the
still
country
too
to
low.
take you.
Yeah.
Say again?
My point is between the Stinger and the Javelin, 5-1
It's
ain't
higher.
enough.
You're right.
It's way higher.
You're right, because they've nullified the tanks and the heavy weapons. So if the Russians seriously wanted to take Ukraine, which will have a 30-mile perimeter, they are going to need every single soldier that's in Ukraine to be on that line. I don't think it's going to happen. They can destroy the city.
It's not achievable.
Yeah.
Well,
and they'll be susceptible to attacks from behind.
Well, and I also think you can't have point men because they're shooting their brothers and they know it. And they keep surrendering, right? Now, if you look at the tactics that Putin has switched to, what's the main thing? It's standoff weaponry. It's aircraft dropping bombs, and it's artillery, because those guys don't have to look at what they've done.
Right.
Like, that's the system that's going to continue to function. All you can do is wreck stuff. You can't actually take anything, because anytime you project force, you roll in tanks or roll in aircraft, they get destroyed by individuals with smart weapons.
And they
Did you see
Zelensky? Mud.
Did you see Zelensky broadcast from his office to tempt them to come for him?
Come get me.
He's my hero.
Now you know what he reminded me? He reminded me of Ariel Sharon. When Sharon kept killing the leader of Hamas, and then they appoint a new one and he'd kill him next. And then he literally stood out there and says, "Come get me."
Bob, does this type of rhetoric make you uncomfortable?
No, it doesn't make me uncomfortable. What I'm sitting here thinking about is I'm thinking about Eisenhower's farewell address. Beware the military industrial complex. Yeah.
But I would argue the military industrial complex has changed, where the cheaper weapon is killing the more expensive weapon now reliably.
Right. Okay. Well, let me continue. It's like I said, going back to, I try to, think locally and think globally and act locally, right? And I don't like, what my grandkids are going to, what are the world my grandkids, if they live that long, right? Because, there's still that other thing called the planet's burning up and there's some bad shit happening.
Yeah.
Right?
We actually have real problems to deal with, not self-inflicted ones.
Yeah. And so there's a good argument to be made. I'm sad about people dying, and I'm sad, but it's all that this could be, the grand distraction. This could be, and believe me, I'm very aware of when this first started happening. I really did think about Sarajevo in 1914, right? That just one stupid mistake and one stupid overestimation compounded with a quantum leap in military hardware just laid devastation. Right?
Beware entangling alliances.
Right, and get Verdun, and before that the Civil War. So that stuff scares me, but I'm more sort of frightened by people. There's just, goes back to World Trade. So I lived through World Trades. I lived through that thing. I really did. I was right next door to the Empire State Building. I saw my life passing before my eyes.
Morris was there too. Right? He was right there.
Yeah.
At the
I was 100 meters
Twin
away.
Towers.
Yeah, and so the I guess outside of that distraction, it's more about this stuff. I guess this stuff just keeps going on. That's what I'm sorry. My thought came back, and everybody jumped on invading Iraq. You couldn't get a T-shirt out there fast enough, right? And it turns out Iraq completely destabilized. It destabilized the Middle East. There's no, it's a real poor excuse.
The big mistake was the de-Baathification. If we had left the social services in place, we would have left a better country probably. Yeah. But we decided
to do alone. You need the Mandarins.
Right, but it was tangential to the actual issue at hand. Blowing up, I said all that stuff. But the point being is that to say that you're a pacifist, it's believe me, it is not one of the hardest things in the world to be is a pacifist, right? It's not that easy. And so, but what happens is people, after 2001, let's blow that shit up. And now it's like the bloodlust. You can sort of feel it coming up, up in you, up in you. And now we want to go out and we want to go get them. And the discourse. What's interesting in the discourse is the public, not the media. It's really the branding mechanisms of marketing kick in. Go back to the hostage situation. Remember Nightline in 1980? Remember day 31, day 42, day 500,
Yep.
day blah 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 blah. They literally branded that war. That war had its own logo, right? And that methodology keeps going on. So now what I'm worried about is if indeed you say, look, man, are there alternatives other than blowing shit up? Which is, I'm not saying sometimes there's not. I really do think about what happens if the Russians say, okay, we got Ukraine, let's do Austria. Why not? Let's see what happens, right?
So, Bob, let me ask you this. There's been
Yeah.
enormous progresses. And my brother,
Mhm.
my brother departed from us a couple of years ago, and he was a veteran in the during right at the end of the Vietnam War, and he became a very devout pacifist, and he and I had very interesting conversations. So I very much relate to what you're saying, even though I'm much more of a hawk probably in your and many people's eyes. I believe that the world is already moving towards a better place. North America is free from nation state conflict right now. South
That-
America is fairly free. Lots of parts of the world are at more peace than they've ever been in any other century. It's just going to take time to extinguish this stuff, and it may take hundreds more years before we can get there. So I think you're trending in the right direction, but if it bleeds, it leads. We look for bad news because that's how our frog brain is wired, and that's the way it's going to stay. So we're always going to be focusing on the worst case scenario.
There's a new dimension here, though, and I can see it here. My wife will not listen to the news anymore, and she was fairly
Neither do I.
engaged. She stopped. The other thing that's new here for me is I put out an Oculus 3 weeks ago, and I said, "This is different. I don't
remember
need
that.
to be here anymore. I don't need to be here anymore." And
What's
now,
an
so when I get on
Oculus?
the bike,
And
An
Oculus,
Oculus
reality.
Quest, if you go to VR.
goggles.
Oh,
it's
VR
VR.
goggles.
It's complete
My
immersion
treatism
VR.
is an option.
I see.
I do
Yeah,
think
no,
there's a new
it's-
device in this war. There is one advancement, and it is the economic sanctions, not the trade sanctions. The idea of cutting off the finances of a government that has stepped out of line, that when the world agrees, we won't allow their economy to function in our economy anymore.
It's what we
Because
hope
if you
the
need
Security
5 to 1,
Council would do.
yeah, if you need
Exactly.
5 to
And
1,
what we hope the
you
UN would
need
do and the League of Nations before it.
Yeah, but if you need 5 to 1, you need so much money. You need to be a global trading partner to conduct a modern war. It's impossible without it. And if the global economic system says you don't get to play, you don't get to conduct a war. Like, you're going to fail. I would argue that the mechanism they've applied to Russia now, it's going to take a while to show the overall consequences. But what it shows the world, the same way that 1991 war showed nuclear war is obsolete, what it shows the world is if the world agrees to cut you off financially, you lose every time.
Mm.
There is no way to win without global trade. And so if you don't get to play in global trade, you don't get to win. So why fight?
And I'll say that the only country that's currently immune to that for the moment, but hopefully not forever, is the United States.
Well, only because their economy
as
is
the
that
reserve currency.
large.
Right.
Mm.
But eventually, I think that will
as
be
the
the
reserve
case.
currency. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
and this planet would be better off if it didn't work for the U.S. either.
I agree 100%.
Right? But I think what we're seeing for the first time ever, the actual significant progress here, is we've chosen, rather than trade sanction, to economically sanction, to cut Russia off from the economic system, which will actually cripple them for a generation, for a war of whimsy, of really a foolish thing to do that does not benefit Russia and does not benefit the rest of the world. That's what really tells China, like, don't do this, because everybody loses. Like, there's no upside to it. I'm not saying we've rendered war obsolete. I would say what we found is mutually assured destruction without nuclear weapons. right? That
Interesting.
I mean,
we destroy
maybe this is a
economies.
maybe this is a repercussion for chemical weapon use, and it could be applied to Assad and some of those dictators. So
Well,
Yeah.
we
and
don't
it-
feel compelled
if
to
the
throw
world
weapons
cared.
at them.
Well, and we haven't
But
done
what's
this
in-
yet. Maybe we'll spend more time to do this, but wouldn't Putin use chemical weapons in Syria?
Right.
Rather than nuke Kiev, doesn't it make more sense to drop
Actually,
sarin bombs?
I heard some intelligence that said they think he's getting ready to use chemical weapons.
Well, because
against
So the
all
Russian
autocrats
trolls have
project,
been-
all psychopaths project, and so
Okay.
first they accused the
Projection
Ukraine
or
and
its
the US.
admission.
Yeah, it's every time of using of chemical weapon plants and so forth, and the immediate reaction is if they're talking about that, it's because they're considering using chemical weapons.
I have no doubt he's
And-
going to use chemical weapons. No doubt.
I agree.
But
we
I don't
don't
think
have
that
this,
will trigger the third
we
world
don't have
war,
the same reaction to chemical weapons that we have to nuclear weapons.
because they're not nearly as exact to use. They're horrible. They're reprehensible, but
Yes.
they're really not as easy to use.
They're not
I'll
actually
disclose
that
something.
effective.
I'll disclose something here, which a couple of you know. I was exposed to nerve gas during the first Gulf War. It was an accidental exposure when a bunker was exploded that had sarin gas. So I know that Iraq had nerve gas and other chemical weapons during the first Gulf War, which is one of the reasons why
Wow.
I bought into the whole they have chemical weapons for the second war. I don't know what happened to those weapons. Maybe they took them to Assad. Maybe they're still buried in the desert somewhere. But that's one of the reasons I thought they did have weapons of mass destruction, because I was exposed to it. We had pills that we took ahead of time. We had, I was exposed to very little of it. But the wind conditions, the pressure conditions, you can't just throw chemicals out there and they win. You've got to have the right conditions, and you have to have your troops in the right position. And a lot of times you have to deliver them with a plane. And if you can't fly over Kiev, you got to be in Kiev to deliver them in a lot of cases.
Well, and
There's a possible other
that
way.
precise either.
Right.
There's another way this could happen, is that it's used as a false flag, and
Of course.
I mean that Putin has been projecting this through his troll farms, saying that Ukraine has bioweapons facilities that are funded by the US.
We've had a
weeks.
couple of voices in the U.S., and I won't name any names, but we had a failed presidential candidate, not the big one that you all think about, but a minor one, who said that there were 46 plus U.S. funded, that's the term that they used, biolabs in Ukraine, and we should really secure those. And they said it right at the time that the Kremlin was using talking points talking about this. What they failed to say is that the funding from the U.S. was in the form of they did say the BTRP, which is the Bio Threat Reduction Program, which is a program that we use to pay labs, not to fund them, but to pay them for security measures to protect release of agents and to increase their security. And we do it to labs all over the world, university labs,
These are not
pharmaceutical
chemical weapons. These are labs that have diseases in them that they're trying to get more effective at fighting.
Or even if they're just trying to work on something, a better chickenpox vaccine or something.
Yeah,
but
that's what we're talking about.
It's the perniciousness of them saying U.S. funded labs to make it look like we're doing bioweapons in Ukraine. But that's been exposed.
The closest BSL-4, there's 2 in Moscow and there's 3 in Germany. There's no BSL-4 labs in Ukraine. There's a couple of BSL-3 labs. I mean, they don't have.
That's right.
I mean, we're talking about them. Nobody has smallpox here.
We're talking about them experimenting with flu.
Exactly.
Right? We're not talking about this experimenting with
or
smallpox.
hoof and mouth disease.
Foot and mouth disease, rabies. I mean, would you be upset if I took a crack at guessing at which failed presidential candidate it was?
No, go for it.
She wouldn't be from Hawaii, would she?
She is.
Yes.
She is, and I posted on Twitter that correction, and I got a lot of hate, and I've been enjoying hitting the trolls back.
Absolutely,
Nice.
isn't it funny that it's fermented in the former Soviet Union, and it comes out of the mouth of a former presidential candidate.
I hope they paid her in rubles.
Nice.
Wouldn't that be nice? Doesn't go as far as it used to.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit? I know Patrick and I have been on our other show, Security This Week, about how hacking groups, big hacking groups, have been taking sides, most of them on Ukraine, to hack Russia, but some groups that were in Russia already, like Conti, are hacking Ukraine. And some of the drama that goes on in these stories is unbelievable.
I'm stunned at how many Russian groups have not sided with Putin, too. I mean, it doesn't surprise me that Anonymous and that Western groups have.
Agreed.
The fact that a bunch of Russian groups have
Anonymous
gone
is
dark.
Anti-Russian.
Right.
Yes. Anonymous is anti-authority, let's be clear.
Well, in this war, they're against Russia. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not that hard to be against Russia.
That's true.
Yeah.
Enemy of my enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's estimated that 300,000 hackers have taken up keyboards against Russia. We actually have a developer that does work for us that's from Kharkiv, who is still in Russia, still in Ukraine, and is working as a soldier with a keyboard. And we support him as best we can.
But it's crazy some of the things that they've claimed to have done, like hacking into satellites, taking
The TV
over
stations.
TV stations and broadcasting
TV
footage of
stations.
the war.
So in the middle of Putin had a big Trump rally. I hate to call it a Trump rally, but
No,
if you
it's
look at the
exactly what
video,
it looked like, man.
It
I
looks
saw
just like it. I mean, I'm surprised there's no red caps and make USSR great again. And in the middle of his speech, it cut away to patriotic music. I suspect that was intentional. I suspect that was malicious. Well, I think it was a hack. Yeah.
I don't think we'll know until somebody takes credit, but I tend to agree.
Or takes the long jump for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, taking credit's a good way to get a long jump. Like, if you're a really smart hacker, you don't give a crap about credit. You care about making an impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because taking
Anonymous
credit
would
is
take credit.
highly hazardous.
Yeah, agreed.
Yes.
How long we going, Carl?
I don't know. It feels like we're wrapping about up. Patrick,
I could talk to this group all day.
I know, I could too.
This has been fun. Yeah, ditto.
You were talking, Patrick, on the show, or maybe it was in between shows or whatever, about how it would be great to have a sort of a United States hacking militia group.
So what I've said, during the pandemic, some background on this. During the pandemic, we have a bunch of 3D printers at my company. And so as soon as the pandemic came, we started downloading designs to print 3D masks to help hospitals. And we found that the bureaucracy of getting a hospital to accept a 3D printed mask from someone is too much. We tried 2 different hospitals. We eventually ended up providing masks for a good bit of the postal service in our state, which was great win for everybody. And that made me think at that time that we really need our military, our emergency defense program to think ahead and coordinate with people ahead of time to know like who has 3D printers, who's willing to use them, what plans we would have them make, who they would get their plans from, who they would give them to. When I was a commander, when I was a platoon leader in Germany, ready to fight the Russians in the Fulda Gap, I knew where every backhoe and tractor was in my sector because I planned on taking them during the war and digging things. And I used to recon those neighborhoods at 3-4 times a year. And I didn't talk to the farmers to tell them I was going to take their stuff, but I didn't think they'd be there. So we should do something like that for 3D printing, and we should definitely do that something for hacking. I have, myself included, I would be happy to be in a reserve unit that with sanction could go after targets that the government designated. And Ukraine is doing that, but they're doing it now after they've been attacked. If they had done it ahead of time, I think they could have been far more effective.
The problem, of course, is that you have cred and it's demonstrable, How do you pick people, off the internet who say that they are working on your behalf?
Ukraine gave us a good model. People who are known. So, for example, what Carl's referring to is there's a site called Hack the Box that we use to kind of test our skills on. They have about, I guess there's about 50,000 teams and about 300,000 hackers hitting 20 published boxes at every given moment, and the boxes rotate every week. A new one gets retired and a new one gets brought in. We put a team together, 4 guys, and we hit the boxes for about 3 months, and we got to number 7th in the world on the rank, which is pretty good.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So if you had that kind of credential, certifications, that kind of well-known assets, then maybe
You're
you'd
now
be
a
in the service.
backhoe.
Yeah, you'd be the guy with the backhoe. So then you'd be given, and maybe they could do security clearances ahead of time. I've never been convicted of anything. I don't gamble.
Right.
You know,
I
those
mean,
kinds
if
of
you make
things.
it like an
backgrounds.
like a branch of the
Yeah.
armed service, you could
Exactly.
really do it well.
And then the people who come and
A
volunteer.
cyber warfare reserve.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hack Force.
Why not?
And
Hey, you know, if we can
I'm
make
happy to be a
a
colonel.
Star, whatever, a Star Wars.
He always
fleet.
wanted to be a
I'll salute
colonel.
that flag.
Always. I topped out a
So,
captain.
in
Bob, I'd love to
1993.
hear your opinion.
Well, no, it's just a story because I'm a satirist at nature and by nature. So in 1993, I was working for a company that did technical training, and they were bidding on a contract with the UN to go to Bosnia to set up computer networks, and I volunteered, right? And my wife said to me, I came with little kids, what are you going to do that for? And I said, well, you know, I guess if I teach them how to use computers, it's better than having them go out and shooting each other, right? And now it doesn't matter.
Why doesn't it matter?
Think about it.
Now they're using the computers to take each other down.
Shoot each other. Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't
Okay.
matter. That's a bad.
Um,
That's a. You know that's the joke. Yeah, I don't. It's also terribly. I mean, it's somewhat
still
simplistic
warfare.
to me. It's still warfare.
It's kind of
And-
dark. I mean, you know that the outlook there that, you know, just because you're exposed to video games and whatever, that you're ultimately going to not have a conscience and your moral compass is going to be stripped.
It does affect Carl. It's been happening since you and I were kids. Think about it.
Yeah, I
What
know, but I
happens
mean,
to a
just
child-
because that stuff exists doesn't mean people haven't been brought up correctly to know the difference between right and wrong. I mean,
No, it's not. It's not a moral. It's not a moral issue for me. It's a psychological one. What happens to a child? Let's say that a child, 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid is watching TV, and let's say, pick a movie, pick a TV star from Patrick Stewart. Okay, Patrick Stewart. My kids to see Patrick Stewart, and he'd be on a TV show. He's not a good example, but a B actor. B actor's on Gunsmoke. He gets killed. Shows up next week. He's on Mannix. He gets killed. He shows up in a movie. He gets killed.
Yeah,
he shows up and he keeps getting killed over and
that's
over
the
and over
attribute
again.
of a god. Yeah.
Right. And so this 5-year-old kid is watching this, or 10-year-old, and saying, "Wait a minute, this is what death looks like. You do come back." Right.
Yeah, all right.
And
So
then
my
you
question would be, why is your 5-year-old watching frickin' Gunsmoke? You should be watching Bob the Builder or
right, well,
something. I'm really
because-
outraged when I hear stories like my wife's ex, who had their daughters when they were like 3 and 4 watching The Simpsons and watching all sorts of adult humor that's on like so many levels, and violent things. It's just like so irresponsible. But I mean, I get that. But there's Star Wars too, right? I mean, George Lucas's story is about the triumph of the spirit and the human values and the good stuff about being human. It's not, it's not all about just shoot 'em ups.
It's not. I'm speaking. There's a place beyond human experience where language no longer is. There's a place beyond language.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
if you live in a world where shooting things is shooting things, right? If you live in a world where that sort of the sad story is, if you're a teenage boy, what's your mother going to yell at you more for? Watching a war movie or watching some porn?
No, I totally get it, man. I am
In
with
America,
you. Yeah,
not in Europe.
Yeah.
more Bush, let's score.
I subscribe to Civis Pacem Parabellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. And I can tell, Bob, that you subscribe to we shouldn't need that anymore, but we do. Unfortunately, there's still evil in the world. It's in all of us. And I think the only thing that really solves that is democracy and equality and lack of poverty, and we're working towards those things, but it's going to be another generation or two before we get there.
And also, I think we all have a duty to ourselves and our society to tackle the demons that are within us, that that turn us into these monsters, right? I mean, we all have them. Some of us manage them, and some of us don't.
I agree. And I don't. I'm not a utopian. I'm not a utopianist. I get it. I get it. I'm from New York. I took the subway. I get it. Right.
I love you.
You think we can do better, though?
Yeah.
No, I'm concerned about. There's two visions. There's two visions of the dystopian future, and which we know about. One is the Orwellian one, where Estonia fights Oceania continuously, and then there's the if you want to read something interesting, the Huxley Brave New World, where we just voluntarily give ourselves to this.
Yeah.
Right. We just and it's interesting to read the follow-up book that Huxley wrote in '52. He wrote Brave New World in '36, and no, that was his brother, I think. But he wrote a follow-up book to Brave New World. Was it Aldous? I'm sorry, I'm wrong. But he wrote a book. I have to go look it up and get it. But he wrote about his commentary on Brave New World, about what went on. So I'm not, it's like, what sort of, I get it, that there's some forces going on that are beyond your control. Life, life is a little more fragmented than it used to be. I know it now because, I'm old. When I was growing up, my parents never talked about or thought about long-term care. That was an alien concept to them. What happens when you get old?
Live that long.
Or they'd whisper.
Or you go, you'll appreciate this, Patrick. Why are there 3 Deckers in Dorchester, right? 3 Deckers in Dorchester because you rented out the first floor, you lived on the second floor, and your parents lived on the third floor, and that was long-term care, right? That's how it worked. And now because we're so distributed, I mean, I live 3,000 miles from where I was born. And my children live 1,600 miles from me. So now I have to think about this thing called long-term care, which becomes a transactional opportunity.
I don't think it's a good idea to dwell on the dystopian future.
Just enjoy
what
it
other
when it
future
comes.
is?
No. I mean,
Just enjoy it when it comes.
We have to think about reality, of course, but you can easily get sucked into this dark web of thought, and you become ineffective.
And in reality, we've actually made a pretty good future so far. It has its problems, but for the most part, fewer children are dying of preventable disease. More people are living up to their potential. Like, it ain't perfect, but it's way better than it was.
Yeah, it's better than
this
it
is
was.
still the best time to be alive ever.
And let's keep the faith and be the Ewoks. Coming out of the
woods. No longer do you need to have 10 kids to ensure one survive. No, I get it.
Exactly.
But here's where my intuitions are telling me the futures are going to be in the metaverse.
I don't think retreat is the solution. I think we can make the metaverse in reality too.
Well, the metaverse is never going to replace reality.
We're going to get to a point where
certain things.
We're going to get to a point where 80% of the population is not needed to run the world, and they're going to be in the metaverse, and 20% of us are going to be outside, and you get to decide which one you want to participate in.
I prefer to be outside most of the time and then take a vacation in the metaverse from time to time. But I prefer to be face-to-face with people. That's what life is all about.
I don't know. Have you seen your face? Jeez.
Yeah, you're funny, Campbell. Moose humper.
Nice. You're gonna roll some Rory Blythe on me now?
Yeah, of course.
It's a little late for that, isn't it?
Frickin' Moose humper.
All of a sudden we become .NET Rocks.
Hey, listen, guys. This is so awesome. Do you want to do it again sometime?
Yeah.
Should we make
Can
this
we find
regular?
some smart people next time? Oh, wait.
But I want to come too.
Yeah. Actually, no. Here's what I would entertain, because I like walking away with actionable or thoughtful things. I would be interested doing this again if everybody picked one book that they thought was important to know about.
Sure.
and talked about their book, and then we could discuss like a book group almost, because that helps. That's then I'll walk away with 4 books. That's interesting to talk about.
So Richard
That's
and I
me.
are going to have to decide which one of us picks Jane's.
Well, there's Jane's, but also which one of Friedman's books would you pick? Like, I still think Next 100 Years
Next
from
100
George
Years.
Friedman is still a pretty good book, right?
I was going to pick
it's-
that one too.
It's starting to get a little dated now. Like, the models have changed. But,
Who else has predicted that well that far?
Yeah.
Who's the guy
Warfare
that
from
wrote
the Moon?
Megatrends was pretty spot on.
Yeah, well, think about it. Think about it and do it. Me, right? If it was off my hands, I'd go back. I'd do Hamlet, but that's me. But anyway, speaking of being in reality, my dog wants his reality moment outside.
Okay.
Or he's going to have reality all over the carpet.
Thank you, friends. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
We'll put this, keep it on YouTube. We'll see how many hits it gets, and maybe we'll do it again.